The royal palace had never looked this alive before. Golden lights danced across the tall walls, making the white marble shine like treasure. Long red carpets stretched from the giant entrance doors all the way to the raised throne at the center of the hall. The air was heavy with perfume, candle smoke, and anticipation. Outside, thousands of people had gathered to witness history. Inside, the sound of royal drums filled the palace like thunder. Boom! 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 Each beat echoed through the hall, making hearts race faster. Noble families stood in neat rows, dressed in expensive robes and sparkling jewels. Soldiers lined the walls, standing tall with their spears held firmly in place. Ministers whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on the woman slowly walking toward the throne. She moved with grace, her head held high. A crown of gold rested on a velvet pillow in front of the elders, waiting for her. But across the room, one man could barely breathe. King Adrian stood frozen near the throne, his hands stiff at his sides. His face had gone pale. His chest tightened as if the palace walls were closing in around him. He stared at the woman as though he had seen a ghost. No. That couldn't be possible. His eyes narrowed, desperate to prove himself wrong. But the closer she came, the clearer it became. The shape of her face. The calm in her eyes. The quiet confidence in her walk. He knew that woman. Not as royalty. Not as nobility. Not as someone worthy of a throne. At least, that was what he had once believed. A painful memory flashed through his mind. A girl in simple clothing. A tray in trembling hands. Her head bowed low. His cold voice dismissing her as if she were nothing. Just a maid. His maid. A sharp wave of guilt crashed over him. His stomach twisted. How could this be happening? How could the woman he once ignored now be standing one step away from becoming queen? The drums suddenly stopped. Silence swallowed the room. The memory did not come softly. It rushed into King Adrian's mind like a storm, loud, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The grand palace, the shining lights, the heavy crown, all of it began to fade. And in its place, the past returned. The house was large, but it never felt warm. Cold marble floors. Tall walls. Expensive furniture that no one truly cared about. It was a place filled with wealth, but empty of kindness. That was where she lived. Not as a guest. Not as family. But as a maid. Her name was Leona. Every morning before the sun even rose, she was already awake. Her hands were always busy, cleaning floors, washing clothes, preparing meals she would never taste. She worked quietly. Carefully. As if trying not to exist. Her clothes were simple and worn. Her shoes were old. And no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. Move faster, one of the older servants would snap. You missed a spot, another would complain, even when she hadn't. Sometimes, they didn't even look at her when they spoke. As if she wasn't worth the effort. And yet, Leona never argued. She would simply nod, lower her eyes, and continue her work. But deep inside, she felt everything. Every insult. Every cold glance. Every moment she was treated like she was nothing. Then there was him. Adrian. Young, rich, and proud. Even before he became king, he carried himself like the world belonged to him. He walked through the house with confidence, never slowing down, never looking twice at those beneath him. Especially her. To him, Leona was not a person. She was part of the background. Like a chair. Or a wall. Something that simply existed, and nothing more. One afternoon, Leona carefully carried a tray of tea into the main hall. Her hands were steady, but her heart was not. Adrian was there with his friends, laughing loudly, enjoying themselves without a care. As she stepped closer, she lowered her gaze, trying not to draw attention. But fate had other. The nights were the only time the house felt different. When the loud voices faded. When the footsteps stopped echoing through the halls. When even the air seemed to rest. That was when Leona finally allowed herself to breathe. A small candle flickered beside her as she sat near the narrow window in the servants' quarters. The room was simple and quiet, far from the grand rooms upstairs. But here, in the silence, she became someone else. Someone hidden. Carefully, she opened an old book. Its cover was worn. The pages were slightly torn. It was not something a maid was expected to own or understand. But her eyes moved across the words with ease. She did not struggle. She did not guess. She knew. Each line seemed familiar to her, as if she had once lived in a world where learning was normal, where reading was not a secret. Outside, the moonlight slipped through the window, resting softly on her face. For a moment, she didn't look like a servant. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere greater. A faint sound from the hallway made her pause. Her body stiffened. Quickly, she closed the book and hid it beneath her thin mattress. Her heart beat faster. No one could know. If they found out, they would ask questions. And questions were dangerous. Because answers could change everything. The next morning, nothing had changed. The same cold floors. The same sharp voices. The same invisible life. But if someone looked closely, really closely, they would notice something unusual about Leona. It was in the way she walked. Straight, but not proud. Calm, but not weak. Even when she was being scolded, her posture never broke. Her silence was not empty. It was controlled. One afternoon, as she cleaned the long hallway, two servants whispered nearby. "She's strange," one of them said quietly. "Too quiet," the other replied. "Like she's hiding something." Leona heard them. Of course she did. But she gave no reaction. She simply continued. The day everything changed, began like any other. The sun had barely risen, yet the house was already alive with noise. Orders were being shouted. Doors opened and closed in a rush. Servants moved quickly, trying to keep up with the demands of the day. There was an important gathering that afternoon. Guests from powerful families were coming. Everything had to be perfect. And as always, the pressure fell on people like Leona. She moved quietly through the main hall, carefully dusting the furniture, making sure every surface shined. Her hands worked fast, but her mind stayed calm. Until Leona. The sharp voice cut through the air. She turned quickly. One of the head servants stood at the doorway, her face tight with anger. "The silver ring is missing," she said coldly. "The one prepared for today's guests." Leona blinked, confused. I haven't seen it," she replied softly. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Of course you haven't." But her tone said something else. Suspicion. Within minutes, the calm of the house turned into chaos. Servants whispered. Feet hurried across the floors. Drawers were opened, searched, slammed shut. And somehow, all eyes slowly turned toward Leona. She stood still in the center of the hall, her heart beginning to pound. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice steady but quiet. But no one listened. Because people like her were always the easiest to blame. Then he walked in. Adrian. Dressed in fine clothes, his presence immediately silenced the room. His eyes moved across the chaos, sharp and impatient. "What is going on?" he asked. "The ring is gone," the head servant said quickly. We believe it was taken. Adrian's expression hardened. And a short pause followed. Then she was the last one near the room. The words landed like a stone. Liana felt her chest tighten. That's not true, she said, stepping forward slightly. I was cleaning the hallway. I never. Enough. Adrian's voice was sea.